ahead and get started. So I want to welcome each of you and just share with you how delighted I am that so many of you signed up for this webinar. We have an account with Zoom for 100 participants, and I was quite amazed that we filled up. We've never done that before. So I'm going to take a breath, and then we're going to actually get started here. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We're coming today from all around the world, and I am thrilled to welcome each of you to our first video in this series that is unfolding. We gather today from around the world with 16 countries present. We have people from Argentina, Australia, Austria, Canada, Chile, Estonia, Ireland, Israel, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, the Netherlands, Romania, Ukraine, United Kingdom, and the United States. And it thrills me to see that Reiki Home is such a rich, multilingual, multicultural community. And this is one of the gifts that we give to each other, is our connections around the world. So thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. And please put your chats and comments in the chat box. Please keep your videos off and your audios off so we can record this. This is an experiment, and we hope that we can make this work and put this on the website so that you can meet our speakers at any time that you would like. The purpose of our time together is to meet our scholars and our researchers and to give you a taste of the richness that they're bringing to our global community. And as is the whole experience of Reiki Home, this webinar series is a work in progress. Together, we're joining, I should say, an unfolding journey, and each one of you is invited to participate. We hope you will become involved in Reiki Home, and especially in this series. I would like to note a couple of things about the series. We are in the beginning stages of planning what the series will look like, and we would love to have you participate. It's designed as an interactive series. The speakers are wanting to hear from you, and there will be an opportunity in future webinars, not this one, for open, respectful conversations with our scholars and with each other as we discover the diversity and richness and the variety that makes our Reiki Home community so special. The individual researchers will present their own research topics. So sometimes our webinars will have just one of our researchers or scholars present. Other times we will have 2 or more. Sometimes we'll have all 5. It just depends upon the topic and their life schedule and what works for all of us. So it's going to be a variety. It's going to be mixed up. It should be a lot of fun. And I'm hoping that today is just the beginning of many future conversations. Our listeners are one of the keys to the depth and richness of these webinars, and we hope that you will share in the chat your ideas and questions. And if after the webinar you have an idea or a question, you can always go to the website at www.reikihome.org and go to contact, and there is a contact form. And just send us your idea or your thought, and I will give it to the group. So, Robert, you put your camera on, please. And Liad, put your camera on. Dori, Jojan, Justin. There we go. I've already expressed to you when we had our little pre-meeting how delighted I am with the gift that you're giving us. And I just also wanted to say to each of you that I am so very honored to sit here with you today. These conversations began a couple of years ago, and we've had so many exciting conversations together. And can you believe it? We're here. We're actually doing this thing. So, Robert, if you would start off the conversation by telling us about yourself, and then when you're finished, someone else can share, that would be lovely. Thank you.
All right. Well, my name is Robert Fueston, and I've been practicing and teaching Reiki since over 20 years. I started in 1996 and got into Reiki not knowing really anything about it. And as I started talking to more and more Reiki people in the world, my own discovery was that we had all learned something different. So that really got me thinking about this particular system of Reiki. And at that time, I thought it was some kind of unified system. So I didn't understand all the diversity I was encountering. So I took it upon myself to try to find out, about this diversity and where it came from, and try to get back farther and farther back in the Reiki lineage to see if I could find out when some of these other ideas were popping up. Concurrently, I eventually ended into a Master of Science degree in Library Information Science, and I learned how to do research more effectively, especially finding the validity of data and presenting that. So that ended up leading me to another Master of Science degree program, this time in Chinese medicine, and which surprisingly actually really helped me understand the system of Reiki in a very different way. That's something that's, of course, ongoing. I'm a licensed acupuncturist and herbalist, and so basically my livelihood is Chinese medicine and teaching and practicing the system of Reiki. So I'm also a member of the Reiki Alliance, and I'm one of the two archivists for the Reiki Alliance. Myself and another presenter, Justin, who you hear from in a little bit, both worked on the Takata Sensei archives, which was an enormous opportunity to go through all these belongings of Mrs. Takata and letters, photos. I mean, it's mountains of information about her life, and the history of Reiki through the United States and some in Japan. And getting that, to a professional academic setting out in California at a university. So yeah, it's just been a very interesting journey, which of course, just by taking my first degree class in '96, I had no idea where this was going to lead me. I really didn't think I'd end up here for sure. It's been quite an amazing experience and quite a journey. So I turn it over to Liad, who I'm familiar with, and it was just want to say thank you to Elaine, who's kind of put this all together with all of our scholars, and it's been an amazing opportunity to have these monthly meetings with this group. So I hope you enjoy. Thank you.
Hi, hello. Thank you, Robert. My name is Liad Horowitz. I'm from Israel. I'm super, super excited to have the great honor of being here. And I'm extremely grateful to Elaine, who went through all this effort just to make this possible. So truly, truly grateful. And to all my friends here who will be participating in this thing. So I want to kind of introduce myself and continue and to say how much I felt when Robert explained how when he first started Reiki and through his journey, he found out how many stories and how many different traditions and how many the huge versatility that we have in this is something that I felt myself through the years. I started Reiki sometime during the beginning of 2000, and I've been Reiki master for the past 16 years. I've taught Reiki from first degree to masters who are currently teaching, which I'm extremely grateful for. And actually, Reiki has played a huge part in my life and has been, I think, like a lot of people probably here, Reiki has been a big part of the entirety of my adult life. And being exposed to several teachers and several different ways of teaching and ways of practicing Reiki, and kind of was one of the catalysts that made me, as I started my academic studies, to go into East Asian studies, and that's where I did my first and second degree. I went for BA and an MA degrees in Tel Aviv University in Israel, where my specific major was in East Asian history, especially the Japanese history. And at a very early stage, I realized that what I was interested in most was the connection that Reiki had, the very, very ancient roots that I felt that Reiki had in East Asia and in East Asian esoteric traditions. When I was just starting to learn Reiki and practice, I was being told so many times that Reiki had, some had said 2,000 or several thousand years old roots, and ranging from ancient Tibet and all the way to the Pleiades. And I felt like this was something that I wanted to kind of sink my teeth into. And I felt along the way that I have found some traces as I was studying about East Asian history. And going into my master's thesis, my academic master's thesis, I decided that this would be what I would like to focus on. And I set out to write about the East Asian esoteric roots of the Reiki system, and that was the way I started. But I actually didn't imagine what would be some of the outcomes of it, because as I was doing the work, I moved to Japan for a while and studied with several more teachers, and I started comparatively analyzing different Reiki attunements or initiations protocols, through my various backgrounds and with teachers who were very kind enough to share with me their practice and the some of the innermost parts of their practice. And I came to a conclusion. I came to this feeling that there was something that was connecting all of these together, all of these attunements together. And that has become one of the major parts of my thesis. This kind of this anatomy of the attunement, or this pattern that seems to emerge along the way throughout the history of Reiki and Reiki practice. And that is what is currently leading me to the let's say third part of my academic studies, as I'm currently a PhD student at Tel Aviv University. And that will pretty much be my self-introduction. And I'm going to give a shout out to Dori with a big smile and a thank you to all of you.
Thanks, Liad. Appreciate the introduction. It's great to be here. I'm excited by how many people are here, and also want to thank Elaine for all her hard work in getting us all here together. I think putting 5 academics with busy lives together is like herding kittens. And just to say you have a really great herding staff. You've done a great job. So I guess introducing myself and how I came to this work and why I'm here is very similar to Robert's story and to some extent Liad's. And I think we'll probably hear this pattern amongst all of us. But I was introduced to Reiki in 2008 and did my Reiki level training in 2010 for the first time. And much like Robert, I walked away and had no idea what I'd done. What is this? I didn't really understand it all and didn't know how it was going to serve my life, but knew that it was a gift from my first initiating Reiki master and saw it as such, a gift she was giving me. Went on to do an MA in sociocultural anthropology in the UK and needed a topic to study. And one of the things that always came back to me in those early days was the idea that Reiki is spiritual but not religious, which at the time was kind of a conundrum to me. I didn't understand how those two things were separate. And I know a lot of you may laugh and say, well, of course they are. And of course, I understand that in full detail now. But I came really into wanting to see what Reiki was about in terms of the body and how we integrate the body into that practice. And I'll go into more depth with that in a bit. But for me, doing my anthropological research and Reiki, it was really exploring both at the same time. And the people that I was meeting and working with, they came from all different lineages. And it was just a really great opportunity to bring Reiki into my life 100% and meet so many different people across these different traditions and see what was in common between them all, but also what was separate, because I think we need to do a little bit of both. So we'll be hopefully hearing a little bit about that throughout these series. Since then, I did do a PhD in medical anthropology after my MA and wrote a dissertation for my studies on Reiki practice in Britain, and carry on looking at that data and serving the community. I like to bring my data back to the community from which I took it from and hope that that will serve the community in turn. So currently, I'm doing a lot of work with Reiki Home, and I'm also participating kind of, I think, in a consulting manner with the European Reiki group. And yeah, aside from that, I feel like I should go into more depth, but I think that probably says a lot. I know over the years, one of the things that's been really interesting for me is having met Jojan along the way. When I was doing my work on my PhD, I thought I was the only person who was doing anything on Reiki practice from an academic situation. And it happened that I went to a Reiki retreat and met a gentleman there who was participating. And he said, oh yeah, no, there's somebody else. There's somebody else doing that work, which got me really excited. And that's how I came across Jojan. And we have since worked together quite at length in terms of doing presentations about our research, writing together. And that also brought us to Liad and Justin and Robert. And it's been a really great opportunity to share all of our perspectives and our work together in a very productive manner. So this to me is just another extension of that. And I'm really looking forward to being able to bring all this information to everybody in this open setting. And with that, I think, Jojan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Dori, for your introduction. And to continue with your story and working together, it so happened to be that 1 hour ago, the mail came and the new Touch magazine was delivered, where that holds an article of teamwork, where you and I interviewed about teamwork. So obviously that is purely a coincidence, of course. We don't believe in coincidence as scientists. So my name is Jojan Jonker. I live in the Netherlands. I am born in '56, and in 1994 I took my first Reiki class, and it was during the first day part that I was, as I call it, struck by some sort of lightning. And I realized that I should be Reiki master, full stop. And there was no doubt about it. So I'd finished my Reiki 1 class with the shortest delay possible, the Reiki 2 class. And with the shortest delay possible, I had to become a Reiki master. So that was in 1998. So it wasn't a choice of becoming Reiki master. It was my response to what? And that is, of course, the question. Was it something that came from inside? Was it an inner call? Or was it a calling from outside? And was it some sort of vocation that I responded to? And when I was a Reiki master and also Reiki practitioner, I experienced a very special experience. And all that made me wonder, where did this calling came from, and what was it that was sometimes intervening in my life during these Reiki experiences? And when I started to ask questions to colleagues, I got a lot of answers, but not the answers that satisfied me in some sort of way. So I had already studied. I studied computer science in a past life. So what do you do then as an academic? You try to find a book, one book, preferably. Well, that didn't work out. So I ended up to doing a study in interreligious spirituality. And in 2010, I finished that study with a master thesis on mystical experiences of colleague Reiki masters. And that started to give context on the experience that I experienced and so many other Reiki practitioners have. After that, I could continue with a doctoral study, and I took the opportunity to study Reiki as broad as possible. So in the context, in time from the very beginning and even centuries before Usui started, up until contemporary Reiki today. And I try to place in the study, I try to place Reiki in the context of time and culture, and took a look at the spirituality of Reiki to see what changed in the spirituality of Reiki from the moment of inception of Reiki up until today. And so on the one hand, I have this trait of being Reiki marker, so to speak. And on the other hand, I have the trait of being a schooler as PhD. And this brings me, I think, at a very unique place. And that is that I have some sort of a view on the one hand into the depth of Reiki practice and its experiences. And on the other hand, a panoramic view on science, from where you can find so many answers on the context of Reiki and what you're doing and why the practice is as it is and why it developed into what it is. and those kind of things. And it is, when I'm a Reiki master, I'm not a schooler. I separate that. It's stepping in, stepping out. When I'm a schooler, I am objective and I'm not biased by being a Reiki master. But for this series of webinars, I want to be precisely both, and to listen to your questions, your experience, and see if we can, on the one hand, explore the depth of Reiki in your stories, while on the other hand, trying to find a context in whatever we have studied together. So that's my intention for these webinars. And then I pass it on to Justin.
Thank you, Jojan. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And thank you to my friends and colleagues for all of our hard work, discussing these over the last, about 6 months or so. And yeah, it's very exciting that we're actually doing it. My name is Justin Stein. I'm joining you from Kyoto, Japan. But as you might infer, I am not Japanese. I am from the US. I was born in New York. And it's funny, listening to everyone's story, we all have these very similar, attributes in certain ways, that we all are these scholar practitioners and thus stand at kind of different intersections of different lineages in a way. It was funny to hear Liad talk about his bachelor's and master's degree as his first and second degrees from the academic perspective, as opposed to the Reiki perspective. And I think that's something that we all share, but I think actually it sounds like I may be the only one of us who got my first and second Reiki degrees actually as part of an academic study. I had previously been a practitioner of a therapy called spiritual human yoga that was a chakra meditation with a hands-on component. And I began to have some concerns about the practice, which I found very powerful and very transformative kind of in my personal life. But at the same time, it was more of a religious movement than Reiki is. And I was a little concerned about the way that the leader was interacted with the members. And this kind of got me interested in the study of religions and religious movements and healing in religious movements. And I went to Japan as part of an undergraduate study abroad semester to do a Buddhist studies program. And I found that in Japan, there were a number of new religious movements doing healing. And I applied for and received funding to do a research project on what I called at the time energy healing, and learned, was initiated into a number of different groups that did healing, including Reiki and also Jo-Rei, and a couple of others that I studied over the course of that year. And so that's when I did my first and second degree Reiki initiations in 2001, 2002. And at that time, I learned about a lot of different practices, and I practiced, as best I could, a number of different things to try to understand them from the inside, as well as to try to cultivate outsider perspective as well, by reading about them, by thinking about them critically, by thinking about how did these practices come into being and what do they provide for the people who engage in them. What kinds of worldview do the people engage in? How do they relate to one another, to their teachers, to their the people that they are treating, to themselves, to the universe? And I went back to New York. I became a school teacher, but these questions kind of kept eating at me, as I think they did for a number of us. And I ended up going to the University of Hawaii, where I did a master's program. And my original intention was to do a comparative project between Reiki and Jo-Rei, but my supervisors told me it was just too much to take on for a master's thesis. And they told me, you should really pick one thing that you're interested in and just do it as deep as you can go, in this 2-year program. And I felt like Reiki really hadn't been, this was in 2007, the Reiki hadn't really been studied from an academic perspective as much as I knew at that time. I've later found there were some studies at that time, but I didn't know of any of them at the time. And so I decided to try to do a project on Reiki in Hawaii, and I started interviewing people, and I put a survey together. But then when I started trying to write the history chapter, it was like a mess. It was like the Frank R. Java Petter's books had come out by then, and that was kind of about it. And I learned stuff from them, but I really saw that they were also kind of incomplete. And I started putting these stories about Usui Sensei together, and none of them matched up. The story that was on the other thing that was coming out at that time, right, was all of the Chris Marsh and Dave King and these kinds of people who were like trying to find the original, true original Reiki, James Deacon's website and things like that. And Robert Fueston's website, which I definitely used in my master's research. And so anyway, looking at these different stories about Usui Sensei that were written in all these books, I just couldn't get them to fit. And so that ended up becoming my master's thesis, was doing kind of a historiographical look at how different people told different stories about Usui Sensei over time, and what those stories kind of tell us about the evolution of Reiki. And that was my master's thesis. And then I applied for and was accepted to a PhD program at the University of Toronto. I realize I'm going on a little long, so I'll make a long story short. But knowing that there were people like Liad and also our other colleague who unfortunately hasn't been able to join us, Naoko Hirano, a Japanese researcher, who were looking at the kind of the early Japanese aspects of Reiki, I felt like, okay, that's good. I don't have to delve. That's not my, kuleana, as I say in Hawaii. That's not my calling. And then we have Robert, who I knew was working a lot on kind of the post 1980, what happens to Reiki in the battles over succession and, the legacies of Mrs. Takata. And I said, okay, I don't have to work on that. And I had actually met Liad through this time. And he said, well, it sounds like you really need to meet Phyllis Furumoto. And I was like, yeah, I've been thinking about that. But then he just wrote an email, oh, Phyllis, this is Justin. He wants to work on Reiki's history, and you should really talk to him, and he should talk to you, and there you go. And I was totally unprepared for that. But that, which was very frightening at the time, ended up turning into a wonderful relationship, which Robert mentioned before, where Phyllis invited me to come out to Arizona and work with herself and Paul and Susan Mitchell. I saw Susan is here. Hi. And also with Robert in organizing and digitizing and preserving Mrs. Takata or Takata Sensei's personal papers. And that really became part of the core of my dissertation work, which I supplemented with also doing a lot of oral history interviews in Hawaii, where I had spent a few years. I was able to meet a number of her earliest students and surviving family of some of those students from the 1930s. I, through her correspondence, was able to find out information and track down some other students of hers from the 1940s and 50s who lived on the US mainland, and kind of uncovered a big part of that part of her teaching and Reiki's development in the middle of the 20th century, the period around the World War II, which I find very interesting. And then finally, kind of, how does that transition into her making the 22 masters that Robert's done a lot of work on in the 1970s. So the Jojan's work and Robert's work and, Dori and Liad's work, I think all I found very helpful for myself, but also kind of a relief, like, oh, okay, good. Like, you're working on this aspect, like, great, because then I don't have to address it. I can just cite you. And that's been a real wonderful experience for me, kind of coming up in this community of scholars. And I'm really happy that we're going to be able to collaborate on these conversations moving forward. So maybe back to Elaine, is it?
Yeah. we run around the circle here. Thank you so much. I have not heard your individual stories until today, and it was really fun to hear. And I know we just barely scratched the surface of your journeys, and they are fascinating for me. So again, I just set in so much gratitude to each one of you for the gifts that you are bringing to our community. And I'd love to turn our attention now to your academic discipline and your specific approach to research. I understand that scholars look at information differently than I might. So I would love to have you just speak briefly about your own discipline and your approach to your research to give us kind of an idea. What is it that scholars do? You spend a lot of time working on your dissertations, and you have spent hundreds and hundreds of hours going through archival information. So in any particular order, if one of you would like to start sharing, just give us a glimpse of that part of the research and kind of a background so we know where we're going.
Well, I can go first again if you want to go in the same order.
You can go in any order you want.
We can do a chaos order, or we can try to keep it organized.
Let's do chaos. That could be fun.
Chaos. Well, I will start just for a few minutes here, and then I'll pass it on to Liad there. But yeah, I mean, my particular approach is extremely logically based. And like I said, when I went through my first master's program, what we're instilled with is to make sure the information that we're disseminating to other people is verified and accurate, and as much as possible. And that deals with a lot of logical sequencing of events. And so generally speaking, we can think of things as having like soft evidence and hard evidence. Hard evidence being like physical things, like here's a photo, these two obviously met, we can see them in the photo. Here's an audio recording, we can hear exactly what this person's saying, or video, or whatever. That's like hard kind of evidence to support ideas, theories, whatever that we may try to prove, disprove, or come up with. Soft, soft evidence, so to speak, is somebody told me something, right? And it might sound good, but we really can't verify that until we, see it's true information, unless we can get other people to verify that piece of information. So, but it gets really complicated from there, because let's just say Justin tells me something, could be a reliable piece of information, right? So I try to find out, well, where did you hear this from? And if you heard it from Dori, okay, now I know where the information is coming from, but it doesn't still make it true, but if Liad tells me the same, piece of information, and he did not hear from Dori or anybody tracing back to Dori, then it's probably true. It's coming from completely different, unrelated sources. So it's a little trickier to kind of prove that stuff. And so sometimes we hear pieces of information that excites us to no end as researchers, and we get really excited, and we just can't wait to see. We can find, hopefully some hard evidence, like recordings or whatever, to support that. But a lot of times we have to put it on the back shelf and just wait. And sometimes we're waiting years, and then out of the blue, boom, it shows up in some, academic archive. I did research at the University of Chicago archives, and I worked, did research at Duke. Personally, I like to travel and go to the people who knew Mrs. Takata, go there, ask them questions, or, take training with people who either knew her or studied under her or one of the 22 teachers she made. It costs a lot of money, of course, time, effort, travel, all that. Because I wanted to be able to say, oh, in the McCullough lineage, this is what's being taught. In the Fran Brown lineage, this is what's being taught. All these, lineages, these streams of information coming out, all going back to Mrs. Takata. And I try to get as close as possible to Mrs. Takata. And then, of course, there are, things that we have hard evidence of what Mrs. Takata was teaching. And so we can see how things stay the same, changed over her career or whatever. So it's very logical. It takes an extreme amount of patience, not to just pass on, unverified stuff, because then it's not really research, it's just gossip, it's hearsay. And so academics, scholars have to do a lot of critical thinking, and a lot of time is spent, with people, going through papers, document, whatever. So, but that's kind of my own format, very, very super logical. So, all right, yeah.
I'm not supporting the chaos thing by reverting to the same order, but I find a very interesting connection with what you say. I was going to pass it to someone else, but this is great because you spoke about different kinds of evidence, and I think that one of the interesting things that my discipline has taught me is to kind of doubt. It's first of all some sort of a critical thinking, or a sort of a doubt, not doubtful, but a thinking that looks at a human history and at humans doing certain something that you're focusing on for a long period of time, whether it's religion or politics or any one of the topics that interest us human beings, is that even is where does soft and hard evidence comes into play, where in the place where, okay, so this is hard evidence. Here we have this account of some let's put it in context, some Jesuit coming into Japan and writing accounts of how he met the shogun, or the things that he has come to witness. Who says that is true? Just because it's not something that someone told me, or it's not. There's all sorts. There's a big scale between soft and hard evidence, and also even the place where you kind of look at the hard evidence and kind of look at it from the place where there is no necessary objective truth to it, but us human beings as experiencing things through our very, very complicated and weird filters, that we kind of filter the world around us and all of our experiences, and then filter them out again as we put it to paper or put it to some sort of account that we relate to other people, whether it's in writing or whether if we chisel it onto stone, which Justin knows quite well about. Some things are written in stone, but it doesn't mean that they're hard truth. This sort to say, as in from my discipline, and this is one thing that I wanted to say. And the other thing that I wanted to say from my discipline, from the kind of a historical point of view, and again, which kind of connects to my own personal interests, which included the comparative religions, which is something that played a big part in my MA thesis, is that you experience things. Sometimes your ability to bring things from your own practice and from your own knowledge can do a lot of can shed a lot of light. There was a point in time that I feel like if I was not a Reiki person, if Reiki was not a big part of who I am, I think my research would have gone to a whole different place. Maybe more very, I'd say, scholarly and not go into analyzing the initiations and to analyzing the pattern that I feel that emerges from many traditions when you look at them from the same place and from a point of respect of a person who practices the system. I hope that kind of puts in my discipline to perspective. And I'm going to let chaos choose the next person.
Well, I don't particularly like chaos when there's a time limit, so I'm going to go next because I'm on the list. So I want to reflect a little bit as well on what Robert and Lee have said so far. As a medical anthropologist, my evidence is very much balanced between what the two have already said. I've been trained as an ethnographer, which means my primary research tool is participant observation. So my evidence is not only what I see and hear and do myself in that space, but what I see and hear other people doing in that space. And those are only two nodes of information, two nodes of evidence. And similar to what Robert has said, I would then reach out to popular literature, archives, whatever else is out there to triangulate that evidence in a way that starts to show patterns, as Liad said, and starts to tell a story. So testimony from people, interviews is very important. So throughout my research on Reiki with my MA and my PhD, and focusing on groups of people or culture, society, if you will, there's many different sites of culture that we can consider. And for me, and as a medical anthropologist, the body is obviously a very important aspect of that, and seeing the body as a site of culture and how a practice such as Reiki is embodied was a big part of the work that I did. And holistically, as a discipline, we also consider how history impacts those understandings, politics, and I say broad politics, I of course don't mean what's happening in the world at the moment, but I mean politics as people tend to act in broad sense. Economy, systems, structures, all these things holistically will impact the way I look at the evidence and interpret that. And then also use theories that already exist in my discipline to help make sense of all that. So theories like the paradigm for embodiment, theories like technologies of the self, which is something that's come out of a particular scholarship. So I could go on, but all these things overlap, interact, and make up the work that I do and my discipline. As such, being a participant and an observer, I did train in many different lineages of Reiki within the UK context, and also went on to do Reiki Master, but that was more of a calling, not to do with my research. So really for me, where I am in my Reiki practice and in my life as a Reiki practitioner is very much entangled with my research. So it's a bit harder for me to separate those things. But like Liad said, it's also given me really interesting insight to doing the scholarship that I do. As I read a lot of the Reiki literature, especially from the sociology of religion, for example, which is a different discipline, I found that a lot of what they were saying was limited because they weren't practitioners. So I do tend to reflect a lot on my own practice and my Reiki sisters and brothers and their practices in order to bring certain things to the academic discussion that I feel otherwise would be left out. And it's really, as an anthropologist, it's great to be able to talk to people like Robert, who work so hard with archival material, because that's not exactly my direct training, and Liad, who's very focused on this very deep history in a particular context, because I can use that as part of my triangulation method, if you will, to help support the analysis that I conduct with the evidence that I've collected. And with that, I will turn it over to Jojan. I know we have limited time, so unless, Justin, you want to go first, I'll leave it to you guys to sort out.
I go. I'm next on the list. Yeah, well, I did it, as I said, in my past life, I studied computer science, and that is hard science. That is more analytical based. And when I started the study of religious studies, that is more a soft science. And already on day one, they explained that for religious studies, you need another way of logic, so to speak. As they put it on day one, they're out there in the world. There are many spiritualities and many religions. In short, there are many truths, and we study them all. But we do not make a statement on what truth is. And that in itself was already interesting. And in such a study, you have to, you get those exercises from, those questions from, okay, can a Buddhist also be an atheist at the same time? And give your argumentation. And then you see that based on the argumentation, step by step, you can come to an answer from, well, perhaps yes, or well, perhaps not. And this is interesting, and it helped me explain why so many Reiki styles emerged over time, because it's often an interpretation of experiences and interpretation of data that is information that is available, and so we all live our own lives. And during the doctoral study, in my case, it took 5 years. I could combine this hard science, soft science approach, because I could use an analytical, or introduce an analytical model for spirituality, and fill that in a way that is appropriate within a religious study. And that was the added value, so to speak, for the academic world. And I think that is where I would like to connect to the listeners, to you listeners, from maybe that you have questions from, is Reiki a religion, or do we practice? Are there dogmas in our practice? Or why are the rituals as they are, and why cannot we change them, or should they not be changed, or what is the purpose of an oral tradition, or what is the goal of this, or what is the benefit of that? And it is there on where I would like to meet your questions, and again be in this playground between Reiki practice and science, and see where we can be of use for you, and where we can add value to your practice, so to speak. Well, I'm running. I see Dori's face. I'm running out of time.
Yeah, I think we're all well over time in this discussion, but I also have a couple of things I want to add. So let's see how this all works out. So I, like Jojan, did my master's and PhD in religious studies, and similarly, I think have a few things to kind of synthesize and respond to what the others have said. First, like Jojan mentioned, we are supposed to kind of bracket off the question of like, what is the true about the metaphysical or theological kind of world. So we kind of are taught what's called methodological agnosticism, that we're not arguing it is the case, we're not arguing it's not the case. We can believe whatever we want in our own life, but to what they call bracket that off. That doesn't go into your text. We talk about other people's truth claims, right? So because of that, I think that I completely agree with what Liad said, that if I wasn't a practitioner, and also what Dori said about her ethnographic experience, that if I wasn't a practitioner, I would definitely see Reiki, I think, from a very different light. And I'm not sure that my work would be able to get like inside what Reiki feels like and what Reiki, how Reiki appears to practitioners in the same way. And I certainly would be much harder for me, I think, to have certain conversations with practitioners. That's one thing. But at the same time, I need to write from the perspective of outside and be able to kind of mediate between the inside experience and the outside experience. So that's one big thing, I think, in religious studies, and to some degree in anthropology and maybe East Asian history as well. To this kind of to be able to bring the cliche kind of is to make the familiar foreign and to make the foreign familiar, right? To mediate between insiders and outsiders. That's kind of one of our roles. The other thing I wanted to respond to was this thing about storytelling, because in religious studies, there's a lot of focus, for example, on mythology. And this is something I'm going to get to when we talk about the upcoming topics. But, I think a lot of times in contemporary culture, the word myth gets used as a pejorative, as an insult, saying, oh, that's just a myth. You still believe that old myth, but in religious studies, the word mythology has a very different meaning, which is a story that creates meaning, right? A story that a lot of times is passed down from generation to generation, that is taught from teacher to student in order to explain a certain truth. And that truth can be a different level of truth than the kind of truth Robert was talking about, where we have historical facts that back it up. And, we have this date and that place, and there's a photograph and there's the data. That's one kind of truth. But the kind of truth I think that's in stories can be another kind of truth. And that's one of the things I think that religious studies is very interested in, is what types of truth, what types of knowledge, what types of meaning are opened up through particular stories, through particular practices. And so that's, I think, one of the perspectives that I'm coming from in my disciplinary training.
Thank you. Yeah, we are running over, and that is just totally fine. What I would like to do is turn our attention to some of the topics as we've been sharing in our meetings. You guys go off and share all these wonderful discussions, and I get to sit and listen. And so I wondered if you would just take a moment and share some of the topics that we have discussed. These may be topics that you will be interested in presenting, or it may be a topic that someone else will be presenting. But just to give our listeners a little idea of some of the topics that that you might like to present, or that we have discussed as a group that we might like to present. So I'm going to mix it up, and I'm going to ask Jojan to start off, and we'll have a little chaos now.
Well, let's start with a chaotic answer then. I don't know yet, because I think that it will unfold what wants to be presented. So I didn't make up a list for myself, and just like to stay open and see what happens within the group, within the listeners, and basically in the end, all five of us can present whatever topic is brought up. So um, um, I've not a hot list from some topics that I would like to share. It's all fine with me. Well, that's helpful, of course.
That's great.
That said, though, we did establish kind of a beginning idea, a framework of what our coming workshops would be like. Although we're very open to input from our audience, and we had an idea for the next one, which I think Dori was going to talk about a little bit.
Yeah. So the next one which we had on schedule, in large part to give people something to look forward to and start to already maybe think about some of the questions they might have, or topics they're interested in, which is very broad and general. And the topic here is the question, what is Reiki? And what I really love about this question is that I can imagine you're all already understanding that because we come from such different disciplinary backgrounds and our focus is so different, the answer to this question is as broad and wide as the group that's here talking. So each one of us could have something different to say and how we would want to define Reiki. We all understand Reiki is, the combination of two Japanese terms, Rei and Ki. That's a common definition to start with. But I believe what we hope to do in this topic is to go much deeper. For example, I could certainly present common elements and understandings based on the many different lineages that I worked with during my research. I believe Liad could certainly refer to the differences in initiations, but also the similarities, I think, more importantly. So each one of us has something, I think, to say in response to this topic. So this could very well be the topic where all five of us are present, depending on the time, of course, and level of interest. But that is the first one on the docket. And I imagine that Jojan would also be there because he and I have also done some work in the past in trying to answer this question from the perspective of our studies, which were quite different. And it always leads to very interesting conversations. With that, perhaps I could turn it over to Liad. Or Jojan, you have something?
Dori, in between. Dori, in between. Are you going to unveil the Holy Grail Reiki?
No.
Okay. Well, just checking.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Not yet, please. I just want to say that this might lead to the next topic or be a little bit off topic. But I have to say, one of the things I love most about us meeting, and as mentioned before, there's been a lot of meetings leading up to this one, and this was pretty rare in cases, or at least within several of us, not having a lot of chance to meet and just discuss and different ideas. And the thing I love most about meeting these wonderful people in this group and in this context is that just the conversation between us can raise so many interesting things to us, so many insights, so many things that I found personally to be very helpful in my research, in my thinking. I can easily think about several conversations with each and every one of these wonderful people that have been kind of milestones in my personal development of this scholarly perspective on Reiki. And as mentioned several times, most of us started out in this sensation that we're kind of alone in the world, but slowly this came together and we discovered each other. And I think that first of all, First of all, I'm full of confidence that some broad subjects, just like what is Reiki, for example, will already in themselves kind of lead into other topics shooting off. I think that each and every one of us can tackling the subject from his or own perspective is a workshop or a webinar in itself. For example, I can give the Japanese a perspective, I'd say, from a historical point of view of how Reiki is part of the stream of esoteric thought and practice that has been flowing for so many thousands of years, and just flowering and moving into the West, bringing amazing notions and that still work and prove how, as humans, we all connect. Again, that's just from my personal perspective, and maybe since we haven't heard Robert yet, maybe I'll ask Robert, how do you what do you want to contribute on the subject?
Oh, sure. This is definitely chaos, according to our plan, but that's okay. When we have conversations together as scholars, I mean, it's quite remarkable. I mean, we start talking about something, and we are just inundated with so many different perspectives and ideas that it really helps each of us broaden our minds to see, things in a very myriad of ways. And it does help on our own research and our own personal development. And it's funny because, the group's called Cercul Scholars. So, we're supposed to put our little scholar hat on and almost like Liad said earlier, like separate ourselves, from our practitioner self, which most of us have talked about that. It's pretty weird in some senses because, when we're practitioners, we're like in the zone, so to speak, and all this other stuff doesn't even matter. But when we're scholars, we're expected, to be analytical. We're expected to hold certain standards and to apply certain rationales and stuff. But what we had talked about, one of the topics potentially being was, the post-1980 diversification of Reiki, because up until around 1980, there was Reiki going on in Japan, but it was, so like, let's say underground. people weren't really hearing about it. So it was mostly through the Takata lineage that it spread. And when she went to transition in 1980, she had about 22 teachers, but not all of them taught. And the ones who did teach, there's little variations here and there, and then more and more, variations and more variations. And there's this whole stream of variations. And I think that, we want to talk about that kind of things, the organizations that formed in the early 80s, different things that started being incorporated from other practices and systems like the yogic system. People start to incorporate, the chakras into the Reiki system and other things. There's a wide variety of topics that we really do want the audience's input on. And like some of the others, I've studied and trained in, many Reiki lineages. But when I finally kind of got to Usui, Shiki, Ryoho, with people who were still teaching very closely, at least to the way I've heard Mrs. Takata teach on these tapes, it was a game changer, for me, because I think it was Justin that brought up that, it's like, it's about storytelling, that, there's certain truths that are passed along in storytelling. And it's not that the story, we're not looking at it whether it's historically, accurate or whatever. What's the truth that's trying to be explained and passed on to the next generation? And that's where, as practitioners and as teachers, that's completely different in a lot of respects from our scholarly self. But yeah, I felt like that was home for me, that particular, style, so to speak, of Reiki. And although, like I said, I've studied other styles, which has really helped broaden my perspective. And so who's left? Dori, have you spoken? You spoken? Justin, have you spoken?
I think Justin's up.
Justin, you're up, man.
Okay, I just wanted to say real quick, because obviously all of us can talk. I mean, this is one of our skills. But I want to say we have about 17 minutes left in this 90-minute first thing. And we did want to have a little bit of time to address some questions, I believe, from the audience. So if anyone out there has anything that they want to bring up at this time, please type it in the chat window, and Elaine, our wonderful host and moderator, will go through that chat window and bring up a few things, I think maybe in about the last 15 minutes or so that we have. But just briefly, yeah, I mean, I think that all these topics are really wonderful, and we definitely have a whole list of our own topics that we've brainstormed about, things we can talk about together, things we can talk about on our own. But I do think there is a real creative synergy when you get 2 or 3 of us chatting together. Things, like Liad said, every one of these people here, I feel honored to call a friend and a colleague, and has been really instrumental in helping me see things from different perspectives, and introducing me to new ideas and information. So yeah, it's even though at the end of the day there might just be one of our names on the front of a book, it's certainly out of a collective conversation that any of us are able to do our work, and I feel very grateful for that. But yeah, some of the other ideas that haven't come up include the lineage and the way that practices have been passed down and have changed or developed over time. One of the things I brought up before about the stories of Dr. Usui, different kinds of mythological practices in the Reiki communities, and how storytelling, particularly about Usui Sensei, has been a really important part of the Reiki practice. And yeah, the way that Reiki relates to modern medicine and Reiki and the healthcare system. Robert is very equipped to talk about Reiki and Chinese medicine or Sino-Japanese medicine, Kampo, as there's been some ideas about how that may have influenced the development of Reiki. So yeah, there's a lot of different things. Reiki and religion, Jojan mentioned. Is Reiki a religion? What does spirituality mean? We say Reiki is a spiritual practice. Yeah, so these are all different topics that we've thought about bringing up, and we have a loose framework for how we want to maybe move forward. But as I said, we're very open to hearing from our co-conversationalists. That's all of you. Although I see none of you are writing anything in the chat window.
Yeah, they're probably working on it as we speak. They're working on it as we speak. I wanted to say, Justin, I wanted to just add one small thing. You mentioned lineage. It's I would want to expand on this subject and ask, within this context of things that have existed kind of in the air or in the backwater of Reiki forming up, things like lineage, how they got into the system and their importance right here, right now, as well as something that I believe I haven't thought of yet, but also perhaps the notion of secrecy in Reiki, especially in the, putting in context where Reiki came from, with the background of esoteric teachings and the very big important part that secrecy, and even in that a very special type of secrecy in Reiki, and kind of what is the place of secrecy within Reiki traditions right here, right now, especially in the age of internet and with things flying all over the web, in the speed of typing, in the speed of QWERTY, the place of secrecy in Reiki today. So that was my 50 cents, or nickel, or whatever, my 100 yen.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, the chat box has been busy, and they've all been private. So I've been trying to keep on top of this, and I may have missed some of them. There have been a couple, well, there have been lots of thank yous, appreciations shared, and the suggestion was made that at the end, we all come online and get a chance to just see each other and wave goodbye. So I'll see if I can make that happen. There was a question about the different lineages that each of you were trained in. So if you would like, I'm just going to share the questions that I have picked up off of the chat, and then you guys can figure out, because obviously you can't discuss all of these. So one person asked that the lineages that you were each trained in be shared. Another question was, have you found any documentation for what I've been told that Usui had only one initiation, not different ones for different levels? Logistically, what would the next sessions look like, time, price, etc.? I can answer that. We don't know. We're figuring that out. That's a conversation we'll have after this. Another question, any theories about where the Tibetan symbols from Reiki originated from? Have any of you found any basis or relation to Tibet or Reiki, ancient Asian history, etc.? How does the circle of scholars intend to balance these public conversations with the hidden private nature of the practice? Let's see if seems like there was something else. How do you validate field research? For example, talking story. Have you considered researching from the phenomenological approach? How can you be sure of your own objectivity? Is Reiki spiritual or energy, and how can you differentiate the two? So there's probably more up here in the chat box, but I haven't gotten to them yet. So any of those pique an interest for any one of you?
Elaine, would you like to maybe pick one of those? And
are we signing off in 9 minutes? Is that right?
Yeah, supposedly.
So we probably have enough time for 1 or 2 questions, and the kind of which are, is, let's say, answerable by closing the debate, not opening a complete and whole one. I'm gonna try with one of those who I feel were kind of in my sphere, or perhaps kind of touching some things that I've mentioned. The one about how do you balance public conversation with the hidden parts of practice, the private, the he-ho parts. This is something that welcome to my life, or at least my scholarly life, because I was this I said I wasn't gonna do that to myself, but I was the one being stupid enough to tackle the innermost, privatemost parts of Reiki, like initiation and that kind of stuff. I as a Reiki person, as a Reiki practitioner and Reiki master, I have absolutely no intention in revealing any parts of Reiki that are considered hidden or secret, or especially if they're not from my tradition, between I wouldn't want to upset my tradition or any other person's tradition. So in that way, I would only speak about things in Reiki and in initiation, which are things that I would say most of the people would probably be comfortable with, as in talking about the narrative or the things that teachers would tell their students or initiates in the Reiki workshop or whatever you want to call it. And second of all, some of these things are things that I would only consider mentioning as I'm meeting with other Reiki masters. I wouldn't have a problem, and I have done this before. I've met with another Reiki master. I've given them initiation. They've given me initiation, and we would talk about it in an open place of sharing. But I wouldn't want to do that in any other way that would kind of hurt the tradition or the feelings of any practitioner. So I hope this kind of touches the nature of practice, and maybe also about whether Usui had one initiation or not. Maybe it's the sort of things that are best discussed between perhaps Reiki masters, or at least a group that feels safe about discussing such sorts of things as initiation. Does anyone else would like to add on that?
I'll jump in and just say, regarding the private nature and balancing that, I'm totally on board with everything Liad said. I think it's a balancing act. It's like walking on a tightrope. And just to point out too, that in those places where I have talked about something that might be considered hidden, it's only because somebody else has already done it. Like, when I first started, it was very much a question of, do we talk about the symbols and how do we talk about them? And it's only when I'm able to reference somebody else as having already done that I might mention it. But I was very clear that there were things that couldn't be discussed, and I wouldn't go into that. And that does put me as an anthropologist very much at risk of criticism from my own discipline, because they don't like to hear that. So it is a balancing act. It is a tightrope. Also, I just want to add that the question regarding lineage, I was trained in Usui, Shiki, Ryoho, Gendai, and Reiki Genkai-Do. Those are the three lineages that I trained in, just to address that question. And the other question regarding phenomenology, absolutely. That was 50% of the work I did for my PhD research and my manuscript that came out of that. So in phenomenology, there is the notion of bracketing out the truth of anything and focusing on the experience. And that's very much what makes up my work in its totality, is focusing on the experience rather than the truth of it, which has already been said. So I didn't mention it in detail. And with that, I will pass it on.
To me. Okay. Well, I fully agree with what Liad said. It is, especially the initiation, is such a sensitive topic that it should be addressed in a separate webinar. But also, when Justin and I spoke about religious studies, it's often about interpretation. And here we encounter already from how is this whole statement sacred and secret interpreted by Reiki styles in general, and by Reiki practitioners and Reiki masters as individuals. And what was originally meant by sacred and secret in Japan. So there is discussion before we can touch upon something like the initiation. And what Liad also said is, really, you, even between scholars, sometimes we have to create a sacred space to be able to discuss these things. And the more sensitive the topics become, the more important that such a space is created before even we, among each other, touch upon those topics. And it is balance. Oh, and by the way, I did Usui Shiki Ryoho, and Yikiden Reiki, Usui Reiki Ryoho out of calling, as you know, and Yikiden Reiki because during the doctoral study, I wanted to experience a Reiki 1 and 2 class given by a Japanese person in Japanese language and see the difference of a Japanese Reiki style and a Western Reiki style. That's my background. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're running down on time. Anyone else have a comment that you want to make before we close?
Yeah, I just want to touch on that idea of balancing really quick. Real quick though, I mean, because I mean, some things are only discussed between a teacher, you know, a master and a master student. And for me, that's a very sacred space. And even though I have had these relationships with several teachers, I'm very fortunate because I've had other experienced teachers, although I wasn't their student, would, you know, act as my mentor. And but that kind of thing is after building relationships with someone and connecting and reconnecting and developing a relationship, and not just discussed willy-nilly, so to speak, in this kind of seminar. So there's definitely that kind of, you know, balance between what we're going to be discussing isn't going to be revealing the, you know, these inner secrets of traditions. So.
Okay, thank you. Somewhere up in my chat list, there was a suggestion that you each give some readings to help us get up to speed in your research. And I let the person know that we will be putting your books on the webinar so people can find them. And this will be a topic in our next meeting of all of us to figure out what kind of recommended readings you might like for them to access to help understand your work a little bit better. I am really sad to note that it's now time to close. This, as I found in our meetings, we could go on for hours. And it's just been a very rich time to get acquainted with you. And I feel like you have done a great given a great introduction to what's coming, and I have no idea where we will go. I do know that our next topic is going to be on what is Reiki, and we will be meeting soon to start preparing that webinar, and then we will let you all know when we're ready to go. See if there's anything else. Just to remind you, because the chat will close when the meeting ends, if you have other ideas that you would like to have the Cercul consider, go to www.reikihome.org and use the Contact Us form and send us your thoughts. And I have no idea if you all can now put your videos on and unmute yourselves, or if this is something I have to do. I thought I knew what I was doing, but I don't. So if you would like to take a moment and put your video on and wave goodbye. Looks like videos are coming on. This is great. Feel free to take your mute off if you can. I'll see what I can do as well.
From Indiana, USA. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It comes through from Minnesota. Keep Fruitable. It looks kind of dark because I've got a window in front of me, but I'm waving. So it was nice to be with you all. Thank you so much, so much.
Thank you all. It was very interesting, and I would like to say hello to Liad and Dori and Justin and Robert and Eileen and everyone on this meeting. Thank you very much.
Do you say hello to me too?
Yeah, of course. You can get a cup of coffee after a few minutes.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. It was good to hear you.
Hi, Rebecca. It's good to see you.
Hi.
Hi all, this is Yolanda from Ireland. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful experience. I think it's really unique what's happening here. And it's great to be part of it. And I'm longing for more and more and more. So thank you very much.
Hi everybody, this is Claire in the UK and I want to say thanks so much. It was wonderful to listen to you all and can't wait for the next one.
Kokoro sama deshita.
I'm Rian from the Netherlands. Happy to see you all and to hear what is told to us. I hope to hear more.
Okay. I apologize to those of you that I can't figure out how to get your video and
Bluetooth. Yeah.
audio on. Is there people that are yeah, I don't know. I've stopped a couple of videos and I cannot, for whatever reason, figure out how to start it again. So I'm not sure. Still learning these wonderful platforms. So my dears, we are finished. And I invite you to come back again. And for the speakers,
Hi, Susie and Paul.
For the speakers, I would invite you to now our GoToMeeting so we can do a bit of evaluation. Now, so if Robert, Dori, and Justin, and Jojan, and Liad, you will go to the GoToMeeting link. We will continue our discussion for about the next topic.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. On the count of 3, we're going to leave. 1, 2, and 3. See you next time.